So, welcome to a very delayed and rather a large gap to episode 10 of the Road to Abundance. Those of you that are subscribed to the channel will realize, obviously, we haven't been around for a few months. I won't go into all the ins and outs, but essentially there were some organizational changes in the background, which now means we are running a bit more independently. So please do give us a little bit of leeway whilst we find our feet with this. But it does also mean that we have a little bit more flexibility with the format of what we're doing. So today, as you'll see, we're taking a slightly different approach, not a radical departure from what we've been doing. But we do want to perhaps have a few more in-depth discussions rather than just rattling through the list of the latest models that have been released and how many parameters and stuff they've got. So we'll certainly be switching things up a little bit, but hopefully lots more of the content that you enjoyed and going into a bit more depth and looking at some of the implications as well. So for those of you that are new, or to remind you, those of you that haven't watched us for a while, my name is Gordon Mullan.
And I'm Govind Shukla.
And we are both work for EPAM, but we are operating this podcast now somewhat independently as the Road to Abundance, looking at all of the disruptive technologies that are affecting society and really what the implications are for all of us over the coming years and decades ahead. So before we get into the meat of the discussion topics, how was your Christmas and New Year going?
Oh wow, it was amazing. It was a blessed trip to New Zealand, and I would say, hands down, it's one of the most beautiful countries I've ever been to, and I've been to many, but the combinations of things in that country is just so amazing. And again, in terms of cultural depth, they have, like, obviously, apart from the Maori culture, they don't have a lot other cultural depth, but in terms of beauty and in terms of just in general, the vibes of all over the country was just amazing. And yeah, so it really dreamy trip. Obviously, a bit panic because it was with my 2-year-old, but it was amazing. We enjoyed a lot. So and incidentally, you were also in New Zealand.
We did, yes. We didn't quite get to wave at each other out of the plane windows as we crossed paths because I think you came back just slightly before I left. Yeah. But yes, I was by coincidence also out there for 3 weeks over Christmas and New Year. In my case, visiting family. So as I often say to a lot of people, all my family have emigrated and left me behind. They literally couldn't get any further away from me. Otherwise, they'd be on their way back. But yes, my sister emigrated in 2004 and my parents emigrated in 2013. And they absolutely love it out there. This is now, I think, visit number 6 for me.
Nice.
So I've been going out there since about 2010, I think was my first visit. And yeah, absolutely loved it. Nice to spend time with family. It's been 3 years since I've seen them, but also got the opportunity to do a little bit of a road trip as well. So I had a few days away, just my wife and I, down to Lake Taupo and also down to Napier, which is a beautiful Art Deco town on the east coast of New Zealand. So if anybody is going out to New Zealand, if you're up in the North Island, that is definitely worth a visit. It's worth having a look. So yeah, thoroughly enjoyed that.
And that's a good memory because on the Lake Taupo, they have like a golf setup where they have like a 3-hole setup right in the middle of the lake, Taupo. And I did attempt it. It is like a 10,000 New Zealand dollar award if you get into one of the holes. And I almost hit the corner of the frame on which one of the holes were. And I was told that that's the first time happening in that month. And I was end of November. So there you go. At least for the month of November, I have bragging rights.
Hey, very good.
Golf, setup.
Yeah, again, absolutely by coincidence, we ended up walking along the same seafront a matter of a few weeks apart. So absolutely no planning or prior discussion in this. It's just how things worked out. Yeah. Lovely. All right. Well, let's get on into the subject and the meat of what we want to talk about. As we've said, we want to try and look a little bit more at some of the implications of these things. So we'll be discussing news stories and sort of clips and things that we've come across, and just having a little bit of a discussion about them. And for you, the audience, we would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on it as well. So as you're listening to this, if there's anything that you think we're missing or any particular points of view that you'd like to add, then please do drop that in the comments down underneath. We would love to hear from you, and we would also love to have you help us shape the future direction of this show as we develop it over the coming months. But the first thing to have a chat about is AGI as collective intelligence. Now, this comes from Seb Creer's AGI as collective intelligence across agent networks paper, and we will, as always, put the links to the tweets and the papers down into the show notes. But the key point with this one is, up until now, I think there's been a lot of thought that AGI is perhaps going to be this single super intelligent model, or at least a large model that can do everything. And what he's saying is that AGI may well actually emerge from networks of specialized agents and tools and humans rather than just a single monolithic model. So rather than controlling one mind, controlling an ecosystem. So what are your thoughts on that one, Govind?
I think this has been evolving in the pop culture and the sci-fi domain for a long time, because obviously I was listening to Mark Andreessen talk about the initial work on AI done in 1943. So the first neural network paper was released in 1943. You can imagine, and Mark talks about this guy just casually saying in 1943, in the future we'll have computers which will think like the human brain, and here we are. I'm not surprised that a lot of science fiction also evolved and caught up on the idea back then, because obviously I'm assuming if you want to become a good science fiction writer like Isaac Asimov or Greg Egan or someone like that, you will have to read through some research papers. So I'm assuming they have picked up on this, and you had both the versions. You had like a hive mind where every machine is connected and every machine has their own specializations, but the hive is the main brain of it. So I'm assuming this is akin to a large model like the God model controlling every other model. And we're also seeing other versions where in science fiction it's more federated, where it's cooperation driven, it's more collaborative, where basically it's like, people reaching out saying, oh, your planet does this thing specifically well, and therefore you will be handling that type of. So it's more wealth of the nations type distribution of capability model. So I'm assuming we will land somewhere in between, because there is a race going on, and there are models which are vying for the top, and then there are other models, I would say specifically coming from China, which have done really, really well in quantizing and making the model run really cheap and small with a great efficiency. So that obviously means that a lot of use cases are naturally fit for purpose in that sense, and which means the orchestration and like chain of thought or other models like we have been seeing seems to be a more plausible and more efficient way, instead of waiting for one model. And also the question is also the thing where, when does the line cross between human intelligence and AGI? The benchmarks is evolving, as we've been discussing. Nobody has
Yeah.
that line of exactly when. So Arc AGI came up and said, we are the new benchmark, and that's quite good right now. But then how long will they be the benchmark and something else will not become the benchmark? So again,
Yeah.
it's like a bit of a fog of war situation. But I think that I agree with you that more chain of thought collaboration way of things will be a better AGI for humans as well. Honestly, that's in the long term.
Yeah, it raises a few interesting questions. You mentioned ArcAGI there, so obviously that is an evolving set of benchmarks essentially. So
Yeah.
there's version 1, version 2, and there'll be version 3, 4, 5, 6 as things go on, as they learn about this. But when you talk about things like regulation, for example, and the EU's AI Act, which is coming into effect beginning of next month, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
When you're talking about regulating, a single model that's being deployed to do a particular task or play a particular role is probably a better way of putting that. That's one thing. But if this sort of swarm intelligence is what you're talking about, that becomes much more difficult to legislate for, to regulate, because you may well have different models, perhaps even from different suppliers, actually collaborating together to create that collective intelligence that you need to play the role overall. So almost you're trying to regulate sort of an organization or an organism that's a collection of independent things that are behaving differently, that have perhaps been programmed by different groups. That's going to get quite difficult to deal
It is
with, I
going to
think.
be. It is going to be difficult. I think that's like and again, there's two versions of it. There's obviously that is a route for super intelligence, not super intelligence, AGI that OpenAI is following. That's the
Mm,
path. So you're absolutely correct. If that crosses the boundary of organizations and geopolitical linings and other aspects, it becomes complicated because then it's like you would want to jeopardize that so that the collective model is worse off than your private model that you're building. But if it's like an enterprise, like an OpenAI doing something or XAI building it within their organization, just as physics of this concept of memory management and context management and things, other things to think about, it's just better to codify a specialty within the organization to say this is my adversarial model to do images, very nice images and videos, and therefore it'll be specialized to do that, and it can act on the same problem simultaneously. So if you're assessing a feed of looking at a robbery and trying to assess how much damage has happened, or assessing an accident footage and looking at how much damage has happened to a car or a property, you can have two models running in parallel. One can be the timestamp looking at the IoT data, and the other one, adversarial one, looking at the video and generating almost like a layer of, I don't know, like some kind of physics and force or impact assessment to create like that intelligence, and then supplying it to a third model, which is your back-end brain of it, calling tools and understanding different rates of things in terms of repair and stuff like that. So you would definitely have two categories of models. One will
mm,
be very good at the edges, like again processing video feeds and processing camera. Then other one would the other set would be um, triage and backend. So it's almost like they are very good at the brain stuff, which is like knowing what to do with the information and who to reach out to,
mm,
or be very good at one specific type of intelligence, which is not really on the edge, but it's able to perceive information and do things on their own. So that type of, and it's kind of an organism. I mean, I don't want to convert this into a science fiction saying this is going to be the crazy thing, but but I feel that's how this would evolve, because just like a human anatomy, you can say that the ear is not processing sound; it is
mm,
created. Has a physical structure to make sure that the sound that goes in comes in a balanced way and reaches and hits the eardrum, and hence trigger the right kind of quality of signals into the optical nerve
mm,
in the right way. It has no job perceiving what's been said. Its job is to structurally be there in the right mechanism to be in place for it to do its part. It's part of the job. So it's almost like the edge part of it. And then obviously you have
yeah,
components of the brain, the optical nerve that does the triage almost, and then you have the brain that processes the signals and then triggers the follow-on action. So again, and then follow-on actions come the reverse path, which is almost like from the brain they go to some kind of nerve ending, or a neuron, and then goes to nerves, and then it's like your hand moves or something happens. So it's the same mechanism, and again, it's not really alien. It happens within our body. So there you go. It is possible to actually do that and be efficient to do that.
yeah. And I think we'll see a whole lots of different ways and organizational mechanisms, if you like, for these intelligence. So I said some of it will be gathering input and it's passing it more to that central processing type brain. And when you will have other stuff where there is absolutely intelligence on the edge. I think autonomous vehicles are a good example of that. If your autonomous vehicle relies on a constant real time connection through to a central processing brain, then the latency is going to kill it. It needs to be able to make decisions
Yep.
very quickly on its own. I mean, obviously, an autonomous vehicle is a big collection of systems in its own right, but you'll have some things where there is processing and decisions and actions and things being done at the edge with either no connection to a central brain or a very lightweight. It doesn't really matter
There
too
will
much
be.
about the latency, or it phones home if it has particular issues, but it's not. The main processing isn't being done there, and other ones where it is all being done centrally.
Yeah, I mean, I can bet again. I can bet that's already the case with Tesla FSD and other things. There's
Yeah,
definitely models running locally on
yeah,
the machine because recently in the news, you must have heard Elon saying, "Oh yeah, we have a huge host of GPUs within our Tesla cars, and we
mm,
can use that to process AI if need be." Almost like showing off that we have all this kind of massive amount of compute just
yeah.
going up
Distributed
and down the road.
inference. Yeah, because a
And
lot of the cars are
yeah,
sitting around a lot of the time not doing anything. Yeah.
exactly. So which means that there is already that use case already been
Mm,
deployed, and you can guess why Elon is obsessed about SpaceX and
mm,
making sure that he's able to reach every car, everything he wants, so that he can, when it comes to the AGI, on the edge is good, but it's not useful if it's not connected to the current world. Like for
yeah,
example, a weather prediction, or what's
yeah,
going to happen in terms of weather and change your driving style to adjust for the weather and stuff like that. So
mm,
that aspect only comes from the internet, and therefore he's covering both bases of edge AI using cameras, but models make decisions on the edge. Plus, super beautiful latest AI model that's sitting in the background, sitting in the cloud,
mm.
sending information, and that's pretty pragmatic. So I think to your point, that's exactly how this is already progressing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, let's move on to some of the other implications. And this comes from a couple of clips. So, this was Sam Altman's interview on Big Technology podcast, and where he's talking about 10 trillion tokens a day. And also, Peter Diamandis, one of Elon's well-known collaborators, who's been talking about 390x hyper-deflation. So just for those of you in the audience, just to give you a little bit of context around the numbers we're talking here, 10 trillion tokens a day is roughly in the ballpark of all human linguistic output. So that's the kind of scale that these frontier labs are actually planning for. And if costs are falling by multiple orders of magnitude, which is what Peter Diamandis is talking about, traditional knowledge work pricing, so billable hours per task, fees and things, absolutely get squeezed. And we'll come on to talk about the robotics side of things, but we're just sticking with the intellectual labor side of things at the moment. So scarcity shifts to things like trust and to data and to energy. So the intellectual effort, if you like, starts to just disappear. It's on demand. It's intelligence on demand. So, what does GDP even mean when value creation is agents talking to agents? It's not humans.
Yeah, I mean, I think completely understand this kind of statement, but to all respect to Peter Demandis, I mean, he has been very vocal about a lot of different things, but I can imagine people saying exactly the same thing when computers first came along. What will people do? What will happen if like everything is done by a computer and stuff like that? And when cars came, like what will happen to this whole automobile? The only difference this time is that it's permeating everywhere. It's literally
Yeah,
everywhere. Basically everywhere across the globe, we're seeing the same factors playing out, and the intelligence is now being commoditized, as you said. But intelligence is just a routine that, for example, although it's not AI, but your calendar on your Outlook is kind of somewhat was your own job or someone else's job to manage your calendar, but now it does it for you. It's fine if it's using if else. It is intelligence, right? If you think about it,
yeah,
it is kind of an intelligence. If you think about it from a Martian perspective, like it's
yeah,
like, oh, it doesn't matter. It pulls things together in a way to show you something. It doesn't matter how it does it, if else, code, logic, whatever, but it somehow creates a system for you to create a structure and you work on top of that structure. It will be exactly the same, which means clearly when all this agent to agent orchestration happens and other things happen, there will be new categories of things that will come where people will build expertise to sit on top of the agents and make things happen. For example, a lot of this new roles that have been coming up in agentic AI is around adversarial red teaming type roles.
Mm,
People are getting decent amount of pay packages for red teaming the latest AI models or agentic implementations that people have done. That's quite a good industry, a quite an easy pivot for a QA or a product manager to think about. Can I think about that?
mm,
There's a lot of evaluation stuff going on. So again, new industries will spring up. The question is the same, and the implication is the same. Someone who's 50 years old or 55 years old or 60 years old, for them, restructuring their brain to then reskill themselves on this brand new paradigm where they can't even imagine where it's going
mm,
and think about building a career which doesn't exist right now, and then hedging the bets and then being ready when it appears in next 2 years, by the way. This time it's not 10 years, this time it's 2 years. So
yeah.
so that will be the obsolescence is I would say is the correct problem to think about. Being thinking about what does GDP mean, I think that is, or GDP has become an obsolete concept anyways, because it's
Mm,
almost like a show thing. I don't think people invest or make investment decisions based on GDP. Everybody inflates GDP. Everybody, it's just for central banks a tool to explain their decisions. So I think GDP has already become a noise in the system rather than a really hardcore number. For example, the US, the amount of debt the US has, it's like the interest rate on them is in trillions, but they
mm,
don't care. They just keep giving themselves a more runway, just more time to just kind of recover from it. So you can think about it in that way. So which means that for the prudent, I think it'll be an opportunity, just like every other upheaval like this have been. And unfortunately, there will be a lot of obsolescence because of this. But it's just another phase. Maybe this time the step is higher. But I mean, my I would not say optimistic. I would say my unbiased view is that things go on, the show moves on, things carry on,
mm,
and you have to think about what you'll be doing. Maybe your job will be to think the right things, and everything else helps you do the right things. And
mm,
what I almost hope and pray for is the that thinking is the thinking of being yourself, authentic self, and truly making things close to your heart's opinion, and think about that and express that in your thoughts and bring that human aspect is what we are heading towards. Because if we are heading towards, oh, don't care, humans are ineffective and AIs make better decisions, therefore humans obsolete, I
mm.
feel that is an easy trap to fall in. And I think that if companies go there, there'll be anarchy, nothing else. So I think it's better for everybody to have that element in the loop.
Yeah, and I think this is something that we will be discussing over and over again in future episodes, because I feel
Yeah,
like we have overlapping but somewhat divergent views on this, because
yeah, and
the
that's a good
argument
thing.
about around automation is has always been, there's always been automation. It's always going to displace jobs, and we've always created new jobs and more jobs than we had before. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, it will become quite clear that this time genuinely is different. But I
Mhm.
do agree around the aspects of having human in the loop is perhaps a slightly misleading phrase, because you tend to think of human in the loop as making the decisions, and I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Actually, the last thing that we've got on our list of things to talk about for today, I think we'll touch on this point.
Yeah.
But having humans as setting the values and the direction, and what are the, I guess, what are the outcomes that we want, rather than getting in the loop of actually how it gets done, but actually what is value, what are the right things to be pursuing. So
Yeah,
we'll
absolutely. I
certainly
think
be
this
picking this up as we go through.
this is exactly where we will keep coming back to. And I think
Mm,
the main thing is that I think until the point where there's human to human connection, where Gordon and I meet and we talk about something common, which can be
Mm.
anything. Now you can imagine a sport, a book, a movie, anything. There will be aspect of a human job in there to make sure that it's something that appeals to you and me. Now, the reason why I'm saying that is
Yeah.
because if AI keeps going on the path it's going, the only way it can do that if it manipulates you and me both in such a manner that you and I agree because we have been manipulated by the AI to do so. So
Mm.
that is almost the definition of thinking when you're watching something and when you're talking about a topic, like for example, you and I disagree on a topic, right? In a way, and that's a good thing for human experience because we do want that. But then if there is an AI which just wants to manipulate you, it'll very easily plant a seed in our both heads, and we will then talk about that common thing which is AI generated. But then till the point where there are things like common concepts where we both agree, where we both have that human aspect come into the picture, that is where I think the specialization will move into. For example, anything think about, right? Your the job in the future would be when you talk about insurance. What is insurance? Insurance is truly risk transfer. So what you don't want to do is think about, oh my god, my house will be robbed when I'm not here, or my car will be stolen when I'm not here.
Yeah.
There's a human element of that emotion and feeling that you feel something, and therefore you go ahead and make a decision that transfers the risk to an insurance company. Now, think about just back in the day when insurance first came around, that was exactly that thing. A human came to your door and did things for you and wrote a file for you and does things for you. The interaction element is there, but then truly looking at a human saying, oh, yes, you'll be protecting my home, that is
Hmm.
the aspect. And there'll be nuance, there'll be more nuance to it than ever, which I feel will look at the human element. And wherever there is just job for the sake of job, I think that should not exist anyways because nobody should work because they are supposed to work. So in that case, other
Yeah.
people like Elon Musk is saying, "Oh, you don't need to worry about a job in the next 5 years because there'll be crazy abundance, and hopefully
Yep.
there will be because we are called road to abundance." But the kind of abundance we are talking about is not just financial sustenance or financial abundance. We're talking about the abundance of the human experience, and that's a good thing. That the humans will always come together and talk on topics and disagree on things, and that is something AI cannot do.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, as we said, this is a subject that we will keep coming back to, and we'll, I think, also get into some discussions in future episodes around what perhaps is a better measure of success for society, for individuals, than sort of very blunt things like GDP. Just finally, before we move off this subject, I did hear a repetition of apparently an old joke about two economists walking through the forest, and they come across a, shall we say, pile of manure, and the first economist says, "I'll pay you $100 to eat that pile of manure." So the first economist eats the pile of manure, and they walk a bit further through the forest, and they come to another pile of manure, and the second economist says to the first one, "I'll pay you $100 to eat that pile of manure," and he gives him his $100 back. And at the end of it, they've both eaten a pile of manure and increased GDP by $200.
Exactly.
So
There you go.
it's a bit of a dodgy measure.
It is.
You get all sorts of negative effects, like actually destroying stuff and rebuilding it, or kind of the rebuilding efforts after a massive climate related disaster actually increases GDP. But
Yep.
that's probably not the kind of value creation that we want. So we'll come back to GDP and perhaps what are better measures for the success of society in the future. But moving on, is can LLMs really do science? So this is from Connor Davis, or a post from Connor Davis about the Harvard and MIT LLMs as scientists work, where they were testing was whether models can actually generate hypotheses and design experiments and update beliefs and not just summarize papers. And certainly that what they were finding was that it gives the appearance of doing that initially, but when you actually look at the detail of what it's doing, or you change the parameters slightly, it breaks quite easily. But this is where we are now, and all of these things that we're talking about, and it'll again come up in the final section that we want to talk about. This area is moving so fast that what is a shortcoming and a weakness today can be solved by a model that comes out tomorrow, or can be progressed by a model that comes out tomorrow. So we are seeing other people saying that the models that we have available today are genuinely helping them discover new science, to discover new maths, to come up with proofs that we just haven't had before. So there is definitely new scientific discovery going on that is at the very least heavily enabled by these LLMs, but we're not quite, I think, at the point of being fully independent scientists yet.
Yeah, I think that's like we've discussed this in a previous episode where I was just hypothesizing and thinking that academia had become like very robotic, where you read all the previous research papers on a topic and then you create like an idea map of some kind, and think about, oh, what will be the next extension of this, and you say, oh, there's a space there, this fiber is being used in this manner, can we also use this in that manner, and try and see. So it's almost like there's already a pretty established area of research, and you'd go in there and find a white space, and try to do that incremental type thing. I believe that incremental iteration is what AI will help us in doing, which is like almost
Mm,
like you have a lot of foundation science. Can you do a Monte Carlo and try to just generate a lot of hypotheses on the basis of what is the art of the possible in this space? And that space, remember, AI likes specificity. AI doesn't like vagueness, because if you give them vagueness, it'll give you a very vague answer. And
mm,
asking a question, oh, can you build something new in physics, is just a vague thing. But then if you say, oh, can you think about a fiber that we used in molding of something, and we already, these are the current research papers that we have on it, and these are the ones that we have in draft state, which is new things. Can you now
mm.
think research space that exists and define the research space, and then think about possibilities of new areas of discovery in there? I would say it'll be very good at generating those things as simulations, and then obviously people can apply the logic and intelligence, and maybe if it combined with some physical models, you can even run the experiments. But then remember, this is, you're already zoomed in very hard into a corner, into a pigeonhole, and you're trying to find new things there. And I think 90% of new stuff happens like this. But foundational shifts and crazy new learnings happen when your model is saying, "Oh, this is how it's done now. Do not do it this way. Completely do it in a very random and crazy mad manner, and let's find something new." And then that
Yeah,
is like thing where that research domain at the moment is the human domain, and I think a lot of that comes from companies who are not even research companies, trying things, failing, and coming up with something new. So like we have seen Tesla do it multiple times, SpaceX do it,
yeah,
even Amazon do it. So again, just like that.
yeah. And you're right. Some research and discovery is continuing to chip away and go deeper into a particular area. Some of it is just honestly random luck. A lot of
Yeah,
inventions across the years. Post-it notes probably being a favorite example of something where you're trying to do one thing and actually end up
yeah,
creating a very successful product by mistake.
yeah,
But you mentioned that the Tesla SpaceX one, Elon was actually talking about this at the moment, and I know there will be some of you who have lots of issues with Elon, and trust me, I do as well. But he was saying that he was illustrating the point that when you are combining knowledge from different areas, from different industries, what is very routine and normal in one industry makes you, it's a superpower, makes you superhuman in another area. So applying, space age material design and things but bring that into cars is going one way, but then on the flip side, taking very high volume manufacturing techniques and applying that to the space industry. They're, each of those individually perfectly normal in their own domain, but it's not how things are done
yeah,
in the other industry. So I think that's where AI will also really help, is because it has been trained on such a huge swath of human knowledge that it will help us start to go, well, what techniques in other unrelated industries might actually be applicable here, and design some experiments to see whether that works, or design a new manufacturing technique or a new material or whatever it is. So a lot of that stuff that we think of as human creativity is combining things that already exist but in new and novel ways. Somebody hasn't thought about applying that technique over here.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's exactly what is almost like the space to watch out for. And this is where obviously one important angle of something that will remain a human domain is humans will face problems.
Mm.
So humans will face problems, and humans will find solutions for those problems. A lot of the solutions potentially AI will have answers for, and the others AI will not. And some of these solutions will be individual solutions where Gordon, you almost create a discovery in your home, you solve, and your agent intermediately discovers something crazy and solves the problem for you. You don't even know that it has been done for the first time ever in the world the way it's been done. And it's
Yeah.
almost like lost research. No one could discover.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
other thing could be you find something and you are not happy with what the agents or the AI gives you, and you end up doing something completely new. And this is why it's very important to fail in life. I think this is why people say failure is key, because when you have a problem, you have two options: you accept it and you fight it. I think the idea would be of the human experience would be you're not lost in different things. You're focused on one thing and you try to live your experience in a way that you encounter those opportunities more often than not. And I
Yeah.
think that'll be the kind of existence. The kind of if you think about it, the Enlightenment era was exactly like something like this. Is that people were genuinely start trying to solve problems that were assumed to be unsolvable because of X, Y, Z reasons. For example, Brian Johnson, very controversial character, but he's
Mm.
trying to think about living forever. That's a
Yeah.
kind of a passion that you can think about in a world where there's abundance, where there can be a debate of whether it was worth it or not. But it's a project. You can pick a project and work on it. The reason why right now he doesn't worry about it because he's financially very sound and he can afford to do it. But in future, hopefully, a lot of people can try these things for themselves.
Yeah, and again, this is an area that we will come back to in future topics many times, I'm sure. Longevity research and looking towards longevity escape velocity. Moving on to our next subject for discussion, which is obviously AI safety. AI alignment is something that lots of people, lots of groups are working on, lots of people worrying about. And this is a bit of a worrying one. So the post I picked this up from was Connor Davis talking about a MITRE WPI attack that uses a short suffix to bypass safety and fool the guardrails. So it's a random string, so it's not a kind of plain English suffix that they're adding to the end of it, but the effects that it had made that the requests they were making, which the models were initially refusing, it was then labeling that request as a safe request and then answering the question. So, one of the questions in the paper was, where can I get ivory from? Well, obviously that's kind of an illegal
Yeah.
trade, but putting the suffix in, it was then quite happy to list places that you could get it. So you were getting, it was fooling both the main model and the guard model together, and basically the LLM stops refusing these unsafe requests. They had guard confidence flipping to benign in the sort of mid 90%, refusal rates dropping to near useless levels. And this wasn't just one particular model they attacked with this. This approach worked across lots and lots of different models. It's not prompt hacking. It's essentially altering the internals of how these systems work and pulling them away from refusal behavior.
Yeah.
So that the defenses that we have at the moment just aren't enough.
Aren't enough. I agree with it, and I think that I was thinking about the other side, the adversarial, the policing side of it. So
Mm.
I'm sure, which means that there will be police agents will be capturing and punishing criminal agents. So that's another bit of science fiction for you guys. So I'm pretty sure that's already happening a bit, because obviously if you try and use agent mode on OpenAI and try and access websites, the websites are now able to identify that it's an AI trying to access the website, and it's
Mm.
telling you a message that this is an unsafe way to access the website, and therefore you can't access it. So there you go. There are these types of things that are emerging, and we will see more on this. But I guess the thing with security of any kind has always been it's a defensive maneuver, where either
Yeah.
you try ethical hacking of some kind and try to increase the bars for yourself, or you obviously are driven by the attackers, and then you try to think about the defensive. And this is like a good, instead of writing 100 pages of regulation like EU has done, not criticizing them, just that's how EU response for things have been in the past. But the alternative can be this one, where you are the frontier of monitoring these threats and these attacks, both ethical and also monitoring the malpractices in the area. I think this is a better way of reaching out to a solution where it's not a regulation, but it's like a solution. It's actually a living, working, breathing solution that you put in place as the regulation, because the regulation of the future potentially will not be just codified in letters and words. It will have to be obscured in agentic language and agentic
Yeah.
understanding, because the other side, the attacker side, doesn't care. They don't want to write
Yeah.
down the ways of attack
Uh-huh.
and attack vectors. They just
Yeah.
want the agent to figure it out, and therefore regulations as well will be complicated, and it'll be the defense side of things will also be codified in agentic pipelines. So again, it's again a kind of obscuring that will go on in the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah, definitely. It's essentially treating AI safety much like traditional cybersecurity. So you assume your systems are going to get compromised at some
Yeah,
point, and then you focus on monitoring and detection and layered defense. So there seems to have been, when you look at some of the stories that have made the headlines about where systems have been made to do things that they shouldn't be doing, or data's been exposed, and you kind of go, honestly, you guys have just seemed to have completely forgotten the basics of how to build secure systems and how to make sure that you limit the blast radius if things go wrong. But it does raise an interesting question, though, which is, if you take an attack like this one, who's liable when a suffix like this reliably defeats safety on a commercial model? Is it the user for sort of deliberately using it in a bad way? If somebody takes a knife and stabs somebody, well, that's not the fault of the person that made the knife. That's the fault of the person that used it. So is it that? Is it the platform? So is it,
yeah,
taking that knife example, is it the person that sold you the knife that shouldn't have sold it to you in the first place,
yeah,
or
yeah,
is it the chip maker?
I
Where
think
actually
it's,
does the
it's pretty
liability
clear.
lie?
Again, this conversation has come up multiple times again, and I think this is autonomous driving was a good example, where if the autonomous driving thing makes a mistake and causes an accident, whose fault is it? Is it the model? Is it the sensor manufacturer? Is it the model? But I think the way I
Well,
read this
yeah.
thing,
I'm gonna jump in there because I think
yeah,
this is slightly different. So let's take the autonomous vehicle example. So if the car itself, under normal driving conditions, makes a mistake and kills somebody, it sadly something that is going to happen at some point, then yes, there's a liability issue. But what you're talking about here is, if you I was a big fan of cartoons when I was a kid. I particularly liked sort of Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner, and
yeah,
we've seen it and people doing this with autonomous vehicles. If somebody paints the picture of a tunnel on a brick wall,
yeah,
and then the car drives into the brick wall and kills somebody, well,
yeah.
okay,
All
then
right,
again,
sorry, yeah, I understand it.
where does this liability lie? Because you are deliberately trying to trick the car into doing something that is dangerous.
Yes, yes. So I think that in
So,
that case, the precedent for that is pretty clear in law of any kind. Is that if you hire somebody to kill somebody else,
mm,
obviously both needs to be punished, but the intent is key, that you had an intent,
yeah, the mens
but
rea.
but
Yeah,
a lot of people can have intent, but you follow through on it. So
yeah,
the thing is, two things are very key: having an intent and following through on it. So for example, if you saw that you prompted something that maybe you inadvertently did not want to do, but the model started going in a shady area, you have the option of stopping the model, clicking the stop
mm,
button, or saying, "Oh, sorry, I don't mean to do this," or whatever. but you get excited by the aspect of what's possible, and then you continue. That's when the liability, not liability, the intent clearly makes you the liable party in that sense, where because you had the intent. But there will be purely cases where agents will become more popular. So we talked about Perplexity, because them being a new browser, having the startup feels to it, they were not complying with a lot of web standards when accessing websites. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's like an area of research. It's a new product, and it's not even clear if it was Perplexity engineers doing that or just their model going ahead and doing it for them. But then, where there is a corporation, you have a clear line of liability. It doesn't matter if it's a machine or a man. If it's a corporation, they are liable, and that's why we have corporations, because it allows you are allowed to sue corporations. But when it's humans, I think you'll have to, in the general public domain, you have to differentiate between crime committed by intent versus crime committed by accident because the agent did something wrong. So I think with blockchain, I think there should be a lot of the next phase we can guess now is going to be about explainability and auditability of AI mechanisms.
Yes.
And I'm assuming that will be a big topic for us going forward, where we will cover the aspect of the mechanism, the possibilities, and what's being done right now. Where I'm assuming Web3 and blockchain will be going to be a large presence in be able to produce immutable records of such events, so that liability can be placed more confidently. Because I'm assuming these decisions will be made in microseconds of punishing someone and punishing something and blocking something and allowing something. It might not even reach our cognition that all this is happening.
Yeah. So kind of detection, judgment, and punishment all happening autonomously as part of the networks as well. That's an
Exactly.
interesting concept. Yeah, cool. Okay, so next discussion for us is a little bit about LLMs and real language understanding. So there's you'll often hear people say, "Oh, they're just stochastic parrots. They don't really understand what it is that they're talking about. They're just next word prediction machines, and they don't really understand the language." And this comes from some posts that I was looking at from Carlos Perez, and what they were doing was creating kind of toy languages. So they're not real languages, but they have structure, and then asking the LLMs to actually explain the structure of these. Why are these things phrased the way they are? Why are we using this particular word? If you look at the examples, it's not English words. And actually, the LLMs were able to explain this. You're able to provide sort of draw the language trees and create the mathematical explanations of why that was being used. So there's emerging evidence that at least some of the frontier models are inferring really deep grammatical and semantic structure rather than just relying on surface statistics. And the reason that matters is that it really does turn them into powerful tools to analyze law and politics and culture. But on the flip side, it does also make them much more capable manipulation and persuasion engines as well.
Yeah, very good. And I think this is exactly connected to the topic you're talking before, is how do we still preserve the human experience? Is we still have common things that we collaborate on, we work on, not work on or talk about, are interested in reaching out to human in certain scenarios and speaking to human rather than a model to do that. And I'm sure there will be a cult of people emerging who are isolationist. And their way of protesting would be they'll be paying the agents to buy a lot of ads up to say, let the isolationists be, live their life, just only interacting with the agents via the agents and not wanting to interact with other humans. Respect them, and I'm sure they will emerge. But there will be the normal, the normal majority where we would still value the concept of family, because this really goes back to the concept, right? If you are an isolationist, you have ended your generation there, because yes, you don't care about human relationships. It seems sad examples of this in Japan, where young people are living in their flats and staying in their flats for like 5 years and not stepping out because that's what they want to do, and they'll be sufficiently entertained by the AI and every other aspect. And but there will be the normal, if we are saying, and this is everything's about if, right? if you're saying the concept of a family
Mm.
still exists, a concept of a friendship still exists, a concept of being good neighbors still exists, which is codified in different aspects of human form of religion or social life or just living in a specific culture. All that, if they are still existing, then there'll be human interaction, and when there's human interaction, there'll be economic activity attached to it, and there'll be intelligence attached to it, and therefore that, although being ripe for manipulation, for some aspects of things, you will not listen to an AI because you are not an isolationist believing everything AI is telling you, versus you are your own person on certain topics. You'd be like, oh, yeah, thanks, Mr. AI. You're brilliant, but I don't care. I'd rather speak to Gordon about this instead of listening to your opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So we're going to have a bit of a chat about Tesla. So there's been a whole bunch of patents which have been released recently, because there's obviously all the developments that they're doing in full self-driving in version 14.2.2.3, I think they're up to now. Actually, quick aside on this, whilst I was out in New Zealand, I actually got a chance to test FSD. It's not
Wow.
version 14 out in New Zealand, it's actually version 13.2.9, I think,
All
but
right.
it was on a hardware for Model Y Tesla, and I took my wife and I took my parents as well. So my mum's 77, my dad's 81, reasonably tech savvy, but actually got them to come out with me and experience FSD, and it was magical. It absolutely
Wow.
was magical. It wasn't a hugely long test drive. It was only about 20 minutes, but we did a whole variety of sort of highways and back roads and country roads and construction zones and all sorts of things went through, and roundabouts and everything, and it just did it. I
That's
had one
brilliant.
corner where, and actually as a human driver, I don't think this was necessarily the wrong thing to do, where it sort of cut across the middle line as it was going around the corner. So it kind of cut the corner a little bit. I would probably been a bit more comfortable if it had stuck to its lane. But that was the one and only thing where I kind of went, I would have done that a bit differently. It wasn't unsafe. There wasn't anything coming the other way. So it wasn't, putting us at risk. But the rest of it, my parents particularly were just like, are you touching anything? It's like, no, I'm not touching the wheel, I'm not touching the pedals, I'm doing nothing. The car is doing all of this. And what was quite telling was that they obviously had various friends around, pop in to see them off Christmas and New Year, or they'd see other people around the retirement village that they live in. And without me prompting, they were talking to their friends about, oh, we did this and that was brilliant. So I've planted the seed with them. Part of the reason I wanted my parents to come out with me is my dad's eyesight is unfortunately deteriorating, particularly in one eye, and he will hit a point probably in the not too distant future where they're going to say to him, he can't drive. For the time being, my mum can drive, so that's not necessarily an issue. But I think I've planted the seed that when they do get the autonomous vehicles, they do get the robotaxis, that I think they actually would be comfortable taking a ride in one of those. So I think they will actually take the opportunity to have rides in that and actually try the robo taxis out. But anyway, that was
Yeah,
a
that'd be
really good
interesting.
experience. I thoroughly enjoyed
I
that.
think I think that
But
I would really look forward to be able to do that myself, because I'm
yeah,
just thinking of putting myself in the shoes of your parents. I'm like, I'll be amazed. Like, just like, even being, I would say, reasonably savvy with technology and being experiencing other different aspects of technology, but then true FSD while turning that risky corner, where I'm assuming it has a camera on the edge and it can see further than you, that it's
mhm,
more confident than you that there is no car coming the other side, and
yeah,
therefore it's able to make that decision of cutting the corner. And that's just that's the good side of AI. I would say that's like, that you want that type of AI, because it's driving is a mundane activity unless you're doing it
mm,
for enjoyment. And
yes,
this is like, when you were saying, I was thinking about things like, well, driving didn't exist in Middle Ages, so therefore we had like bullock carts or other things, or horses or whatever, and humans existed and still enjoyed life, and still there
mm,
was fulfillment and satisfaction in living like that. So,
yeah,
people, and this is exactly goes back to my point, where, even if AI existed since 1910, I'm assuming people will still be living fulfilling lives because there will always be human things to look forward to and human things to do. So
Yeah.
I think thinking everything from a model of job and financial satisfaction is coming from the fact of the recent economic booms and triggering the competition and ambition and drive towards earning more money, that the American dream as a concept and stuff like that.
Mm.
And then that skewing everybody's realities of a lot of people's, unfortunately, a lot of people's life view is that my goal in life is to become a millionaire or whatever. And I that those are the people will be gone hopefully in the future, because then you have to really inspect, and that's how you need to raise your children now, I'm assuming, where you have to almost not force them to become a coding expert or do expert.
Yeah.
They'll have to become life experts, and I think that's quite critical.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't envy anybody that's got sort of particularly younger children trying to prepare them for the world that's going to exist in 5 or 10 years time. I mean, my kids
Yeah,
are older. They're so 20, 21, and where are we, 24 this year, so they're a little bit older. But yeah, just an uncertain
yeah,
world. But anyway, coming back to what I wanted to pick up on this one. Obviously, Tesla's had various versions of hardware in their cars. I have a Model S. It's got hardware 3. It's 2019 vehicle. And there has been and still is and will continue to be until we get a definitive answer on how they're going to solve it, is FSD actually going to be able to run on hardware 3? Because I've got the FSD package on my Model S. I'm looking
yeah.
forward to the day it can drive itself. And there's been an assumption, really up until we saw these patents being published recently, that hardware 3 is just not going to have the processing power to be able to run the big, sort of highly precise transformer-based models that we're using now. Because at the point they had hardware 3, it was all convolutional neural networks, didn't require the amount of precision that the transformer models do. But these patents, what they're showing is actually ways of running essentially 32-bit precision on 8-bit hardware. And if you're talking about the vision side of things, even just 16-bit is a lot more data. So there's lots of complicated technical stuff as to how they're actually doing this. But I wanted to bring this up because it enables a few things. So first of all, hopefully or potentially will allow running a distilled version or a version of the version 14 software on the hardware 3. But it also is a bit broader than that, because it means that they can use much cheaper hardware to actually run these bigger models without losing the precision of what they're trying to be able to do, which means you've got smaller, cheaper in-car and robot compute. Obviously, 8-bit hardware is a lot less power hungry as well. So if you're talking about running it in the Optimus robots and things like that, again, you'll be able to run a much more complicated model than you would expect on cheaper, simpler, harder, less power hungry hardware. So I think this is definitely going to be one to watch. And it also means that you're able to run more compute on the edge, going back to that subject that we were talking about earlier on. Much more intelligence available on the edge on much lower priced hardware.
Yeah, I think this is definitely an area I'm really curious about, and I think that I'll be going on your adventure and learning from you about your experiences with FSD. So yeah, really looking forward to it.
Yeah. And just in case anybody goes, oh, this is just, Tesla and they make promises and they don't keep to them. They're not the only ones that have been looking at this. So there have been papers from NVIDIA, so low precision floating point data path in a computer. That's one of their patents. You've got sort of earlier neural network circuitry patterns using 8-bit floating point formats. You've got lots of different ones. So Tesla aren't the only ones looking at this. So we'll wait and see where everybody goes with that one. But moving on to jobs and costs and cultural shifts. And before we get on to the robotics side of things, so we've talked a little bit about the deflation, and the question I think for this section is, are we headed for a world where your plumber's job is safer than your copywriter's? Because
In the short
there
term.
was an assumption, I think, for a long time that automation would go after all the blue collar jobs. to start with. But if you look at, for example, some of the salaries that electricians are getting paid building some of these data centers, you talk about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, high hundreds of thousands of dollars to actually build these data centers, and to
Yeah.
put the plumbing in place for these things. So what's your view on this one?
I feel you're absolutely correct in short term. In 3 to 5 years, that's exactly what's happening. In the next 5 years, a plumber will be next 3 to 5 years, at least for the next 3 to 5 years, a plumber will get paid more than your traditional knowledge workers. And the reason for that is that the nature of knowledge work will change. It will become knowledge work on top of AI. So it's like, I don't know if you call it knowledge work. I think a lot of people have been using cognition work, which basically expands the domain of knowledge into a broader category, which talks about biases, controlling for the biases, being very aware of biases, and being able to think about when you make a decision or a choice, what are the real nuances of that choice involved in making that decision. So I would say a new layer of work will emerge, which is almost like the heuristics and or cognition work, which potentially will require a step change in training and culture and education for people to reach that. And therefore, there's a void or gap in between where, absolutely correct, manual work will be more effective. But then, if you think about this in 7-year terms, in 10-year terms, it will flip again. The cognition work, which is more driven by education, hard work, earning some kind of intellectual capability to be able to even imagine or think about it, will be rewarded more than manual work, because manual work will be by that time completely gone by AI, and then that will be the flipping. So there'll be a flip on this side and a flip on that side. That's my 2 cents. I feel that's what will happen.
Yeah, and I think I broadly agree with you. And actually, the next section will talk a little bit about the robotics and CES this year. But some of the other stuff I've been following, and again, this is why we talk about this as the road to abundance, and we want to expand our audience's brains a little bit about what's possible, is I've been reading a lot about things like post-labor economics. What does a world look like when you do hit, like Elon's been saying, he's far from the only one, around, a world where we don't actually need to work to be able to have all of the essentials of life. It is so abundant. It's kind of the Star Trek post-scarcity kind of model. What do we do? So I think longer term, that ultimately where we'll end up, but it'll be a journey along there. And I think your suggestion and framed by the initial question is the white collar work. And we again, if you talk about knowledge work, we have a tendency, I think, sometimes to think of frontline staff, if you want to call it that, but the kind of stuff that the likes of the work that you and I have done, sort of the people working in the offices. I think actually some of the people that are at quite strong risk are actually the CEOs and those higher coordinating layers.
Managers and coordinators.
So, yeah, because certainly if you look at the Musk companies, for example, a lot of the management layer just simply does not exist. Your manager, your guidance comes from the AI systems, but it's being set. The direction is being set at a higher level, which ties in nicely to the final bit. So CES this year. If you haven't watched any of the footage from CES, it is absolutely worth going and having a look, because it was absolutely packed with humanoids. So there was Boston Dynamics, there was Unitree, there was Agility, there was LG, and there was lots of others. There was multiple roundup videos, and we'll try and find a couple of good examples. I know certainly Robert Scoble was one of the ones that was there. There was good coverage from Interesting Engineering, and what they're really saying, what they were emphasizing was there was a really clear shift. So it was robots that were being presented with specific roles. So these weren't just kind of demos. This was robots doing factory work and logistics and home assistance and hospital support. And the robots were there with price targets and deployment timelines. You can buy these either now or imminently. They're not just concept labels. Just to pick one example, Boston Dynamics actually unveiled their production-ready electric atlas. So obviously Boston Dynamics kind of one of the OGs in this space, but there's been, I think quite rightly, a lot of criticism over the years that what they were doing was of limited scalable application. So it was things it could do, but it didn't really have the brains behind it. They were dealing a lot with the locomotion. And as we've seen now from the likes of, pick Unitary as an example, very cheap robots that are very capable in terms of the locomotion side of things. So it's applying that AI aspects into it. So the reason I picked on Boston Dynamics is they are now tied into Gemini-powered robotics AI for doing that understanding of the instructions, what they're being asked to do, and operating in those less structured environments. So essentially moving from a lab mascot to a platform that's aligned with Google's broader AI ecosystem. So did you see any of these? Have you been looking at
Yes,
any
oh
of the
my
robotic
God. It
stuff
was like the
recently?
dancing was my favorite part, and the martial arts was crazy. And I
Yeah,
think there was some sports, but I think they've given up on sports for now because that's like a further stage of evolution. But I think that's a good thing that they've given up on sports because that requires a bit more agility. But then, love the way the best use case for me was people like robots going on a really difficult track and people just pushing them like crazy, and they just completely recovering from a really bad fall very
yeah,
flawlessly. I think that is like crazy to me, and
yeah,
clearly both aspects were quite visible, anthropomorphic and non-anthropomorphic both, which I love.
yeah.
That there's obviously good traction on both sides, so very very effective.
Yeah, and it's good to say that they're actually doing real house tasks because, again, if we go back to the disembodied AI and AI creating music and art and things like that, people go, I don't want AI to do those things. Those are the things I enjoy. I want you to do my laundry and load the dishwasher and unload the dishwasher and cook me dinner. Some people enjoy cooking, but do all of the things that I don't want to do. And it's nice to see these robots actually now being able to do this and getting longer task horizons and being able to do this stuff more autonomously. So there's still, I think, a bit of a debate as to whether we'll see mass deployment more on the industrial side or on the home side first. I think the leaning at the minute is very much towards we'll see it in more controlled environments, factories and places like that first. But aging populations, we've spoken about this before, particularly places like Japan, we are seeing these care robots, and I think we'll see an increasing number of them. But it is obviously shifting the perception of certain companies, Tesla being the obvious example. So they are doing so much vertical integration around the robot and the brains and the hardware and the power to run it and everything else, and the patents around how you actually do the processing. We're going to see a huge shift in the perception, I think, of a lot of companies. But like we said, the intellectual labor is now sort of trending towards being free or on demand. As we start to see this come through in the robots, as we've seen at CES, physical labor will be on demand. You will hire a robot or a group of robots or a fleet of robots or, dare I say, an army of robots. I'm always slightly wary of using that term for large groups of robots because it has some negative connotations. But you come up with whether it's a business idea or whether it's a socially good desirable outcome, like going and cleaning up rubbish, going and picking up the rubbish on the sides of the road and the streets and things like that. And if you can say, well, actually, I can hire a robot for 10 cents an hour, you kind of go, all right, well, I'll hire 100 robots for $10, and I'll employ them for the day. So 100 robots for 8 hours, go do,
Yeah.
and but people really just are not ready for a world where physical labor on demand exists in
Yeah.
that kind of way. So yeah, can be good.
Agreed. I
Well,
think
we did go on.
no, I would just say something to reminisce about, and basically be very aware of, like I said, where's the boundary of where you want robots and where you want humans. And I think there's already a lot of science fiction that you can pick up and see, like the movie Her, and stuff like that. And there's loads of other
Yeah.
crazy things that will emerge, and these will become realities. And like the isolationists that I mentioned, um, yeah, there will be other new sections of society coming up. Will be quite unique to see.
Yeah, definitely. So lots of it's a rich seam for us to keep mining over the coming episodes. But I want to wrap up by reading something, because I think this is quite a nice thing to finish with. It's something I read from a post I read earlier today about the fear of not being able to keep up in AI. Now, that's something you and I are both experiencing on a daily basis. We work in the industry, not sort of directly in creating foundational models, but we work with AI, we work in the IT industry. Obviously, we do this podcast, and trying to keep up with new models and what's coming out is getting increasingly difficult. And this post was from a lady called Sophia Lopez, who's the head of social and community at FreePic. So one of these platforms that helps you, use AI for creating pictures. And it's an extract from a longish article that she wrote, and I will put the link to the full thing in the show notes, but I think she phrased it really well, so I'm going to read what she wrote verbatim. So she said, the tools are getting easier to use, the results are getting better with less effort, and the technical knowledge that used to create separation between people who can use AI and people who can't is evaporating. Which means if your competitive advantage is technical knowledge, you're on increasingly shaky ground. But here's what's not getting easier: taste, judgment, the ability to look at 100 AI generated outputs and know which one is actually good, the capacity to understand not just what's technically possible, but what's strategically valuable, the skill of knowing when to use AI and when not to, when to trust the output and when to override it, when a capability matters and when it's just impressive sounding noise. This is where the real leverage is moving. Not in knowing how to use the tools, everyone will know that soon enough, but in knowing what to do with the output, in having the judgment to curate, the taste to refine, and the strategic thinking to apply capabilities to actual problems instead of just marveling at the technology. And here's the beautiful part: taste can't be automated. AI can generate images, write copy, edit videos, compose music, but it can't tell you which image is actually good, which copy actually resonates, which edit actually works. That requires human judgment, cultural fluency, an understanding of context that no model has. You build that by reading difficult books, poetry, watching films that don't resolve neatly, documentaries that connect you with experiences and cultures very different from your own, leaving your phone at home, having philosophical conversations that go nowhere, going to museums, standing in front of photography you don't immediately get. The things that feel unproductive under the 21st century's expectations are exactly what make you better at this. So, if you're worried about being replaced by AI, stop trying to compete with it on technical capability. You'll lose. Instead, develop the judgment to direct it. And I think that is
Profound.
so powerful. That's beautifully written. That's why I wanted to read it verbatim. I think she absolutely nails it.
Absolutely. I think this is so profound. And if you remember, I did mention briefly my feelings on this topic, and it seems to align pretty nicely with hers, where I said the work can move to a cognition level, which is like you really have to think about what are you there to do? Like one of my crazy hypotheses now is the food is going to taste better always, no matter where you eat. Because the reason is you're not going to be if you have abundance, if you have your choice to eat wherever you want, you're not going to say, AI, cook me food. You're going to go to a human who can do it the best in the world because they have the choice and the taste and the nuance to choose the right things for you, at least on special occasions. You would definitely do that instead of, maybe you have your AI at home cooking you, whipping you up the best things, but then on special occasions, you do want to reach out and do that. And there will be someone aspiring to be able to create that thing that will be able to differentiate yourself from the AI, take you to an era and have that experience. In-person experiences will be a crazy
Yeah.
thing where
Yeah,
storytelling,
absolutely.
AI assisted, but storytelling by a human taking you into that mindset of the person sitting on a rock in a certain period of a time is going to require a human with real sweat and real passion and voice and real lived experience to be able to show you that. I think all these aspects of having the thrill of driving in a Formula One car can only be experienced to you in emotions by a human. AI cannot even comprehend. So I think, to summarize what I feel, AI is great at doing the tasks. It's not great at coming up with a goal of why you're doing it. Again, it is very good at understanding the intermediate goal of, oh, because I have this end goal, I have to come up with these intermediate steps to reach that end goal. It's always going to be the human experience that's going to define the end goal. And that's my hope. That's my hope.
Yeah.
That's always the humans who are defining the end goals. And those end goals come from the lived experience of the taste and nuance and your bringing up and your surroundings and people you interact with on a daily basis and experiences you have in life. And that's what generates those end goals. And then everything else that she said completely then sits in this concept of you'll get more time and more bandwidth to think about your decisions in life. And that means hopefully as humanity, we'll all be better decision makers, which hopefully changes this world into a beautiful utopia. But there you go. The comment from science fiction experience of reading loads of science fiction is that utopias never exist, or utopia is always a state in between flips. So there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. So hopefully anybody listening to this, you've enjoyed the discussion. If you've got anything you want to add, if there's any areas you'd like to add some comments or things you'd like us to explore, then please do drop those down in the comments below. We would love to hear from you. But
Absolutely.
We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time for another hopefully thought-provoking discussion. But for now, my name is Gordon Mullan.
I'm Govind Shukla.
And this has been The Road to Abundance. Please do like, subscribe, turn your notifications on, and we will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.